I am Arthur, 32 years old. 5 years ago, my parents skipped my own wedding for my younger brother's Cabo yachting trip. While my wife and I were sitting on the living room floor trying to figure out the seating arrangements, my mother looked me dead in the eye and said, "It's not a life or death situation, Arthur." Sterling paid his non-refundable deposit. They laughed it off over a Sunday pot roast like my life's biggest milestone was an inconvenient dentist appointment. But there was one major thing they didn't know. I wasn't just some junior architect struggling to pay his mortgage. Months prior, my real estate firm had quietly initiated the commercial buyout of the very industrial park my father's business operated on. And right now, they are blowing up my phone, begging for a massive favor. Before I tell you how the hammer fell, hit that like button if you believe that blood doesn't give anyone the right to disrespect you. And don't forget to let me know down in the comments what city or state you're watching from tonight. Now, let's rewind to the day the illusion of my happy family finally shattered. I am holding it in my hands right now. It is a piece of ultra-thick, cream-colored cardstock with embossed gold lettering that probably cost $20 a pop. It invites me and my wife, Eleanor, to celebrate the union of my younger brother, Sterling, and his fiancée, Tiffany, at an exclusive country club in Newport. Inside the envelope is a little response card with a pre-stamped return envelope. I set the heavy cardstock down on my kitchen island. Right next to it, I place a different envelope. This one is older. The paper is slightly yellowed at the edges, and the postmark is dated October of 5 years ago. Inside that older envelope is a check for $500 signed by my mother, Beatrice, which has never been cashed. It has sat in my safe for half a decade, functioning not as currency, but as a receipt for a dead relationship. I pick up a black Sharpie. I do not hover over the paper. I do not feel a sudden warm rush of familial nostalgia or that heavy, familiar guilt that used to dictate my 20s. I uncap the marker, place the tip firmly against the thick paper of Sterling's RSVP card, and put a dark, aggressive checkmark right inside the box that reads, "Will not attend." I don't write a little note on the back. I don't write, "So sorry we'll miss it," or "Wishing you the best." I slide the stark refusal into the return envelope, seal it, and leave it by the door to go out with tomorrow's morning mail. My phone sitting on the counter lights up. It's a text from my mother. It's the 4th one today. "Arthur, honey, please call me back. Sterling's caterer needs the final head count by Friday. Your father and I are so excited to have the whole family together again. It's time to put the past behind us." I read the words twice. Put the past behind us. It is the universal slogan of every person who has ever caused a wreck and desperately wants to avoid paying the insurance deductible. To them, the past is just a collection of minor misunderstandings that can be wiped away with a polite hug over a Thanksgiving turkey. They don't understand that, to me, the past isn't behind us at all. The past is a load-bearing pillar in the life I built. If you looked at my family from the outside 30 years ago, you would have seen the quintessential American dream. My father, Richard, owned a regional heavy equipment leasing company. My mother, Beatrice, was a fixture on the local HOA board, the kind of woman who organized neighborhood block parties and kept our 4-bedroom colonial in the suburbs looking like a spread in a pottery catalog. My older brother, Conrad, was the serious academic heir apparent. My younger brother, Sterling, was the golden boy, the charismatic athlete who could charm his way out of a broken window or a failing grade. And then there was me, the middle son, the quiet kid who spent his weekends sketching floor plans on graph paper, while Richard and Conrad talked about equipment profit margins and Beatrice cheered Sterling on from the bleachers. In the family dynamic, I was the baseline. I was the reliable utility closet. Nobody checks on the utility closet to see how it's feeling. They just expect the light bulb to turn on when they open the door. When I met Eleanor, everything shifted. She didn't look at me like an extension of Richard's legacy or Beatrice's household management. She looked at me like an independent structure. We dated for 5 years, building a quiet, solid life together. I started my own boutique architectural firm, specializing in commercial real estate conversions. I took my salary, lived way below my means, and reinvested every dollar into commercial equity. I didn't drive a flashy car, I didn't wear a replica Patek Philippe watch like Sterling did to look successful at college bars. I just bought concrete, steel, and square footage. When I proposed to Eleanor on a rainy Tuesday in October, it felt like the final step in constructing my own foundation. We didn't want a massive theatrical production. We chose October 14th, the exact anniversary of the day we met at a municipal zoning hearing. We drove over to my parents' house the following Sunday to share the news. I remember the smell of garlic and baked ziti hitting me the moment I walked through the front door. For the first hour, the illusion held perfectly. Beatrice gasped, threw her arms around Eleanor, and immediately started talking about color palettes and table runners. Richard popped a bottle of mid-tier sparkling wine and made a joke about how he was going to need a second mortgage to pay for the open bar. Conrad gave me a firm, corporate handshake, and Sterling slapped me on the back, asking if we were going to have a cigar lounge at the reception. Felt warm. It felt like the family I had spent 30 years trying to earn. "So, what's the big date?" Beatrice asked, setting down her wine glass and pulling out her iPad. "We need to lock down the country club before the autumn rush." "October 14th, I said, holding Eleanor's hand under the table. "We already secured the venue, an old restored stone mill up in the Hudson Valley. The deposit is down." "October 14th, Beatrice repeated. Her smile stayed glued to her face, but her eyes went blank for a fraction of a second. I watched her left hand slide beneath the edge of the mahogany dining table. Her thumb began moving rapidly over the screen of her iPhone. "That's a fantastic time of year," Richard said, totally oblivious, scooping more pasta onto his plate. "The foliage up there is incredible." "Yes," Beatrice said, her voice dropping into that strange, flat register she used whenever someone rearranged her kitchen cabinets without asking. "Incredible foliage." We left that night feeling victorious. Eleanor fell asleep in the passenger seat on the drive back to our townhouse, her engagement ring catching the amber glow of the highway streetlights. I remember gripping the steering wheel, feeling a profound sense of peace. I thought the worst of my family's indifference was finally over. I thought we were all finally standing on the same ground. I was so incredibly wrong. The storm didn't hit with a clap of thunder. Crept in through the baseboards like rising groundwater. 3 weeks after our announcement dinner, I was standing on the second floor of an old textile warehouse I was converting into luxury lofts. The air was full of drywall dust and the sharp hum of industrial drills. My phone vibrated in my pocket. It was Beatrice. "Arthur, sweetie," she said the moment I answered. Her voice was dripping with that heavy, artificial sweetness she usually reserved for speaking to bank tellers when she wanted a late fee waived. "Do you have a minute? We need to talk about the wedding calendar." I wiped a streak of gray dust off my forehead. "Sure, Mom. What's up? The caterer is already locked in, if that's what you're worried about." "Well, no, honey, it's not the food," she sighed. It was a long, trembling sigh designed to communicate that she was bearing an unimaginable burden solely for my benefit. "It's the date, October 14th. I was looking over the family schedule last night, and it's just completely unworkable for the boys." I paused, the structural blueprint in my hand suddenly feeling very heavy. "Unworkable how?" "You know Sterling's annual Cabo trip with his fraternity brothers is always the second week of October," she said, her tone implying I had committed a severe geographical error. "He's been doing it for 4 years, Arthur. They charter that massive yacht out of the marina. He's already put down his share of the deposit, and he's the main organizer this year. If he doesn't go, the whole trip falls apart for his friends." I stared out the arched brick window of the warehouse, watching the traffic crawl along the interstate below. "Mom, it's my wedding. It's the day Eleanor and I met. We aren't moving our wedding so Sterling can drink tequila on a rental boat." "Don't take that tone with me, Arthur," she snapped, the sweet veneer evaporating instantly. "It's not just Sterling. Conrad has his corporate networking retreat in Denver that exact same weekend. You know how important his promotion track is right now. He can't just skip a mandatory executive function. Conrad has known about our date for almost a month," I said, keeping my voice level. And Sterling's trip is a vacation. It's not a medical emergency. It's not a deployment. It's a party in Mexico. It is a locked-in commitment. Beatrice raised her voice, the sound echoing harshly through my phone. Why do you always have to make things so difficult? You and Eleanor picked this date out of thin air without consulting anyone's schedule. Couldn't you just push it to November? Or do a nice spring wedding next year? November is lovely, honey. We could combine it with Thanksgiving weekend. We didn't pick it out of thin air, Mom. I explained this at dinner. And no, we aren't getting married over Thanksgiving weekend so you can save on floral arrangements. The date is October 14th. Fine, she said coldly. Be obstinate. But don't be surprised when your brothers have to make a very difficult choice. 10 minutes after she hung up, a notification popped up on my screen. It was a 3-minute voice note dropped into the family group chat by Sterling. I leaned against a raw concrete pillar and pressed play. Yo, Artie. Sterling's voice drifted out over the sound of loud bass and clinking glasses in the background. Mom just called me freaking out. Bro, seriously? Of all the 52 weekends in a year, you picked the exact weekend my guys are locked in for Baja? That's super selfish, man. You know I've been putting this charter together since January. My guys rely on me. If I pull out, they lose their deposits. Can't you just tell Eleanor to push the caterer back a couple of weeks? It's not like you guys are in a rush. Just be a team player, bro. Be a team player. That was the family code phrase for roll over so Sterling gets the master bedroom. I didn't type a furious paragraph. I didn't call him out on the fact that his locked-in charter was actually a glorified booze cruise funded partly by Beatrice slipping him cash from her household account. I called my father. I thought Richard, as a business owner who dealt with binding contracts every single day, would introduce a shred of objective reality into the situation. Richard answered over the roaring clatter of an air compressor in his maintenance yard. Artie, what's going on, son? Dad? Mom and Sterling are asking me to postpone my wedding because it conflicts with the fraternity trip to Mexico, I said directly. Tell me you aren't entertaining this. The air compressor in the background shut off, leaving a thick, uncomfortable silence on the line. I could hear Richard hissing a breath through his teeth. Look, Artie, your mother is really worked up about this. You know how her blood pressure gets when the boys are arguing. We aren't arguing, Dad. I'm stating a boundary. My wedding date is fixed. I know, son. I know, Richard muttered, his voice dropping into that evasive, placating mumble that defined his entire marriage. It's just, a lot is going on that time of year. Conrad's firm is doing their quarterly review, and Sterling's had this Baja thing on the books for months. Couldn't you just bend a little bit here? For your mother's sanity? It's just a date on a calendar, Artie. What's the difference between October and November? The difference is that it's my life, Dad, I said, my knuckles turning white against the black casing of my phone. I'm 32 years old. I built my own business. I bought my own home. I've never asked you or Mom for a single dime since I was 18. And now you're asking me to tell my future wife that her wedding day is an afterthought to a yacht rental. Nobody's saying that, Artie, Richard sighed defensively. You're twisting my words. Just talk to Eleanor. See if there's some wiggle room. I don't want any drama hanging over the family. He hung up before I could answer. I don't want any drama. That was Richard's core philosophy. He would gladly watch someone set my house on fire as long as the smoke didn't drift into his garage. That night, the text bombardment began. Beatrice didn't call me again. Instead, my screen lit up every hour from midnight until 3 in the morning with screenshots of generic internet poetry and fake philosophical quotes about family unity. A true brother builds bridges, not walls. Family is the only anchor in a stormy sea. Do not cut the rope. When you have your own children someday, Arthur, you will understand the agony of a divided home. I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark, watching the pale blue light of the phone illuminate Eleanor's sleeping face. I realized then that my mother wasn't trying to solve a scheduling conflict. She was waging a war of attrition. She believed that if she made the process sufficiently miserable, I would eventually collapse just to make the notifications stop. That was how she handled Conrad. That was how she handled Richard. I unlocked the screen, opened the family group chat, and typed one definitive message. The wedding date is October 14th. The venue is fully paid for, and the contracts are signed. You are all fully invited and welcome to stand with us. However, the schedule will not be shifted by a single minute to accommodate outside vacations or corporate trips. If you choose not to attend, we will miss you, but the ceremony will proceed. I hit send. I didn't wait for the typing bubbles to appear. I put the phone on the nightstand and closed my eyes. The next morning at 7 a.m., my phone rang. It wasn't my parents. It was my cousin Lucas, the son of Richard's younger brother. Lucas was an independent contractor, a guy who worked with his hands and had zero tolerance for suburban theatricality. "Artie," Lucas said, his voice rough with morning coffee. "You awake?" "Yeah, Luke. What's up?" "Man, you kicked over a massive hornet's nest." Lucas chuckled, though there wasn't any humor in it. "My mom got off the phone with Aunt Beatrice an hour ago. Beatrice was sobbing so hard she sounded like she was breathing through a wet towel. I rubbed the back of my neck. What's the official narrative?" "Oh, it's a masterpiece," Lucas said. "According to Beatrice, Eleanor's family is completely controlling you. She told my mom that Eleanor's mother demanded October 14th because it fits her high society garden club schedule, and that you're maliciously forcing Sterling to forfeit $5,000 in non-refundable deposits just to prove a point. She's telling everyone you're having a psychological break." "A psychological break?" I repeated, staring at the ceiling. "Yeah, and get this, she told Aunt Clara that if nobody pushes back against Eleanor now, you're going to cut the family off entirely once you have kids. She's implicitly asking the extended family to boycott the RSVP list to shock you back to your senses." "Thanks for the heads up, Luke," I said quietly. "Hey, Artie." Lucas's voice dropped, becoming entirely serious. "Stand your ground, man. My dad spent 20 years eating Richard's dust in the family business because he didn't know how to say no. Don't let them move your markers." I hung up the phone. I looked across the bedroom. Eleanor was sitting up, her hands wrapped around a warm mug of tea, watching me with those clear, sharp gray eyes. She didn't look panicked. She didn't look angry. She looked like an architect examining a faulty foundation. "They aren't coming, are they?" she asked softly. "No," I said. "I don't think they are." "Okay," Eleanor said, setting her mug down and standing up. "Then we build without them." I thought the battle lines were officially drawn. I thought the worst they could do was stay home. But a narcissist losing control doesn't just retreat into silence. They set fire to the surrounding fields. The silence from my brothers was absolute. It was the heavy, weaponized silence of a corporate legal department preparing for litigation. I sent Conrad a direct message with the link to the tuxedo rental portal at Men's Warehouse, explaining that his measurements needed to be logged by the end of the month. The read receipt appeared beneath the text within 2 minutes. Zero reply. I called his office line. His executive assistant told me he was in a high-priority strategy cycle and couldn't be routed. 2 days later, Beatrice dropped her public manifesto on Facebook. It wasn't a direct call-out. It was one of those brilliantly engineered, highly ambiguous paragraphs paired with a high-contrast stock photo of a lone tree standing on a foggy cliff. It is the most devastating heartbreak a mother can endure when the child she nurtured with her own sweat and sacrifice turns his back on the sacred traditions of the family table. Sometimes, outside influences enter a young man's life and convince him that cold pride is worth more than the unconditional love of the brothers who stood by him through everything. True wealth isn't measured in square footage or stubbornness. It is measured in loyalty, praying for healing, praying that certain eyes are opened before unbreakable bonds are torn apart forever. Within 3 hours, the post had 47 comments. It was a digital town hall for every distant relative and suburban busybody within a 50-mile radius. My third cousins in Ohio, women I hadn't seen since a family reunion in the 90s, left paragraphs about how this generation has no concept of honor. Aunt Clara commented, "Stay strong, Beatrice." A mother's intuition is never wrong. The truth always comes to light. I didn't reply. I didn't defend myself in the comments. Eleanor took my phone, logged out of the application, and set the device face down on the counter. When someone is throwing mud, she said calmly, they want you to get into the pit so nobody can tell who started out clean. The physical verification arrived the following Thursday. I came home from a site inspection to find 2 thick, cream-colored envelopes sitting in my mailbox. The handwriting on the front was Beatrice's calligraphy. Inside were the formal response cards for Conrad and Sterling. There were no notes attached. There were no polite falsehoods written in the margins. The will not attend boxes had been filled in with a heavy, black ballpoint pen that had pressed so hard into the paper it left physical ridges on the back of the cardstock. I stood in my foyer holding the 2 stark rejections. I felt a strange, cold sensation behind my ribs. It was the definitive end of my biological family tree. I took the cards, walked into my home office, and dropped them into the metal mesh trash can beside my desk. That afternoon, my phone rang. The screen displayed the name of my cousin Brenda. Brenda was the eldest daughter of Beatrice's sister. In our family ecosystem, Brenda functioned as the central intelligence agency. She collected domestic tragedies, marital disputes, and financial rumors with the meticulous dedication of a stamp collector, repackaging them and trading them across the family network for social currency. I answered on speakerphone while reviewing a commercial lease agreement. "Hello, Brenda." "Arthur, honey," Brenda began, her voice dropping into that thick, theatrical whisper she used at funerals. "I am just so devastated by what's happening. I saw your mother's post, and I just had to call and check on your spirit. You must be in absolute agony." "I'm fine, Brenda. We're busy finalizing the reception details." "Oh, Arthur, don't put up that brave front with me," she sighed, a wet, sympathetic sound that made my skin crawl. "You know you can tell me anything. Your mother's heart is just entirely shattered. Honey, she called me yesterday completely inconsolable. You know she's had those palpitations ever since your grandfather's funeral. If you just reached out, Arthur, if you just apologized for that harsh text in the group chat and offered to push the date back just a teeny little bit, I know she'd forgive you instantly. Family has to compromise, honey." I kept my eyes fixed on the lease document. "There's nothing to compromise, Brenda. My brothers chose a corporate event and a yacht rental over my wedding. That's their right. But I'm not apologizing for getting married on my anniversary. Arthur, it's not just the boat," Brenda blurted out, her desire to demonstrate superior insider knowledge overriding her tactical empathy. "You know Sterling's situation is very delicate right now." I stopped scrolling. "What situation?" "Well," Brenda hesitated, realizing she was about to breach protocol. But the temptation to drop the secret was entirely irresistible. "You know his new girlfriend, Tiffany? The one whose father owns those massive luxury auto dealerships down in Connecticut? Well, her father is taking the whole family to their estate in Palm Beach that second week of October, and he invited Sterling. Beatrice told me that if Sterling doesn't go, Tiffany's family will think he's not serious about the relationship track. Beatrice is just terrified he'll lose his footing with that family if he misses the trip." I sat completely motionless in my leather office chair. "Say that again." "Oh, honey, I probably shouldn't have said anything." Brenda backtracked rapidly, her voice fluttering. "It's just, Beatrice is trying to protect her boys. You know how important connections are." "Brenda," I said, my voice dropping into a register so cold it stopped her mid-sentence. "Are you telling me my mother asked me to forfeit my wedding date, lose thousands of dollars in deposits, and disrespect my future wife's family, so my 27-year-old brother wouldn't miss a free trip to Palm Beach with a girl he's been dating for 5 months? Arthur, you're making it sound so ugly." Brenda gasped. "It's about family positioning. Beatrice just wants." Before she could finish her sentence, Brenda's technological incompetence betrayed her. She was attempting to text Beatrice while speaking to me on speakerphone, lost track of the interface commands on her screen, and accidentally triggered the forward function on a saved audio file she had received from Beatrice 2 days prior. A little gray bubble popped up in our active message thread. It was an audio recording labeled, "Beatrice voicemail, Tuesday 14:12. "Oh God," Brenda whispered over the line. "Arthur, don't open that. Arthur, please delete that immediately." I pressed the wrong. I disconnected the call. I clicked the audio file. The sound of my mother's voice filled my quiet office. It wasn't the sweet, trembling voice she used on Facebook or the helpless, stressed-out tone she used with Richard. It was the sharp, calculating, razor-thin voice of a corporate liquidator. "Brenda, it's Beatrice. Make sure when you call Arthur you really lean into the emotional angle about my blood pressure. Don't mention Tiffany or Palm Beach under any circumstances. If Arthur finds out Sterling is skipping his little Hudson Valley thing for Tiffany's father's estate, he'll go completely scorched earth and Eleanor's father will get involved. We need Arthur to move the date to November so Sterling can do Palm Beach and still show up for the family photos. If Arthur refuses to budge, I'm going to start calling the Connecticut cousins and tell them the venue has severe black mold and parking restrictions so nobody goes. He'll have to cancel if his side of the aisle is entirely empty. Call me when you're done." The audio cut out. I didn't smash my keyboard. I didn't feel a sudden urge to scream. What I felt was a profound, clinical clarity. The heavy fog of obligation that had choked my entire life just completely vanished, leaving behind a sterile, brightly lit crime scene. My mother wasn't a misguided suburban parent trying to keep her sons from squabbling. She was a social engineer who viewed my life as a raw resource to be mined for Sterling's advancement. She was actively constructing a boycott of my wedding to protect her golden child's access to a luxury auto dealership fortune. I took the forwarded audio file. I didn't drop it into the family group chat for public consumption. I attached it to a direct text message to my father, Richard. Beneath the file, I typed exactly 4 words. "Keep defending this family." I didn't wait for his reply. I turned off my mobile network, stood up, and walked out to the front porch of my townhouse. It had started to rain, heavy autumn drops slapping against the concrete steps. As I stood there in the damp chill, a silver Lincoln Navigator with commercial plates pulled slowly into my driveway. The heavy doors clicked open. Harrison and Genevieve, Eleanor's parents, stepped out into the rain. Harrison wasn't wearing a suit. He wore his standard waxed canvas field jacket and heavy leather boots. Genevieve was carrying a massive, insulated carrier smelling of roasted garlic and braised beef, along with a thick leather binder stuffed with floral swatches and seating charts. They walked up the steps. Harrison didn't look at me with pity. He didn't offer a sad, sympathetic suburban sigh. He looked at my face, saw the absolute coldness in my eyes, and set his heavy hand down on my shoulder with the solid, immovable force of an iron beam. "Arthur," Harrison said, his voice deep and steady over the sound of the rain. "A man who doesn't protect his own perimeter has nothing to build a roof over. Your father made his choice. From this second forward, you are a son of my house. When you stand at that altar next month, you look at our side of the room. We will fill every single inch of it with people who actually know what you're worth." We walked inside. We sat down at my kitchen island. While Genevieve ladled hot stew into bowls, I opened my master wedding spreadsheet on my laptop. I navigated to the tab labeled processional and VIP seating. With 4 clean, rhythmic clicks of my trackpad, I highlighted the names: Richard, Beatrice, Conrad, and Sterling. I hit the delete key. The rows vanished, leaving clean, blank white space. I took the title of Best Man/Groom's Witness, the title I had dutifully reserved for my older brother Conrad, and reassigned it to Marcus, an old college roommate who had spent 3 years working alongside me on raw construction sites. A guy who had already booked a red-eye flight from Seattle just to help carry wooden folding chairs. The board was cleared. The old structure was completely demolished. And then the morning of October 14th arrived. The morning of October 14th broke with that sharp, crystalline New England cold that makes the sky look like shattered blue glass. I woke up at 5:30 a.m. in the master suite of the converted stone mill. The Hudson Valley River mist was still clinging to the tops of the maple trees outside the arched windows. My phone sitting on the bedside table gave a short, double vibration. It was a text message from my cousin Lucas. Artie. Just past Terminal B at Logan Airport on my way to a job site. Sterling, Aunt Beatrice, and Uncle Richard were standing in the international pre-check line. They were carrying oversized hardshell golf cases and 2 massive straw sombreros. They actually did it, man. They're gone. I lay there on the crisp white linen, staring at the glowing words. They actually did it. There wasn't any pain left. There wasn't any lingering suburban hope that Richard would suddenly grow a spine at the boarding gate, turn around, and drive back to stand by his middle son. The definitive verification of their absence acted like an instant chemical neutralizer. The 30-year psychological weight of being the family baseline just completely detached from my shoulders and evaporated into the morning air. I stood up and walked into the massive master bathroom. I stood before the full-length mirror, looking at my reflection in the cool morning light. I examined my jawline, the small scar above my left collarbone from an old rebar accident, the steady, rhythmic rise and fall of my chest. I wasn't the invisible middle child standing in the utility closet anymore. I was the sole proprietor of my own existence. I put on my trousers, slipped my arms into the crisp white poplin shirt, and began fastening the black onyx studs down the placket. Outside the window, a low, incredibly rich mechanical rumble shook the gravel driveway. I walked over and looked down from the second-story archway. Harrison didn't just arrange standard wedding transportation. Idling in the center of the circular stone courtyard was a pristine, midnight black Rolls-Royce Phantom. Its massive chrome grille caught the pale orange glow of the sunrise, the car sitting there like an armored monument to dignity and absolute worth. The driver, an older man in a tailored charcoal suit, stepped out and polished the silver Spirit of Ecstasy hood ornament with a microfiber cloth before standing at attention beside the heavy rear door. It was Harrison's silent, unmistakable declaration to the entire county. The man inside this car matters. By 2 p.m., the stone mill was vibrating with life. The interior of the main hall smelled of cedarwood, roasted autumn squash, and thousands of white hydrangeas Genevieve had imported from an organic farm in Vermont. The string quartet stationed near the restored wooden water wheel was playing a rich, cello-heavy arrangement of the folk song Eleanor and I had listened to during our first road trip. I stood at the head of the aisle next to Reverend Vance, an older, no-nonsense Presbyterian minister who had spent 40 years watching families come together and fall apart. I looked down the front row on the left side of the aisle, the side traditionally reserved for the groom's immediate family. There were 3 wooden crossback chairs sitting there. Genevieve hadn't removed them. She had draped each one in a heavy, ivory silk sash, tied off with small, embossed tags that read, "Reserved for family." They sat there in the front row like 3 glowing white tombstones, a stark, visual manifestation of an empty promise. The guests were filing in, filling the 60 seats behind those 3 chairs with Marcus's family, my college colleagues, and structural engineers who had flown in from across the country. I watched people glance at the 3 empty silk chairs, their expressions shifting from confusion to a quiet, grim understanding. Then, just as Reverend Vance raised his hand to signal the processional music, there was a sharp commotion near the heavy oak entrance doors. The main usher stepped back, looking completely bewildered. Walking through the stone archway was Dee Vivian, Beatrice's own biological younger sister. Vivian was 55 years old, a woman who ran a highly successful commercial interior design firm in Boston and had spent 20 years maintaining a cool, polite distance from Beatrice's suburban theatricality. She was wearing a magnificent, structured emerald silk coat. She didn't skulk in through the back. She didn't look around with that nervous, apologetic suburban flutter. She walked straight down the center of the burlap runner, her heels clicking authoritatively against the ancient wooden floorboards. She reached the front row on the left. She stopped in front of the chair labeled Mother of the Groom. With one swift, entirely unapologetic tug of her gloved hand, Vivian untied the ivory silk sash, let it drop to the floorboards, and sat down in the center of the wooden seat with the upright, regal posture of a Supreme Court justice. She looked up at me standing at the altar. She didn't offer a sad, trembling smile. She looked me dead in the eye and mouthed 5 words. "I don't give a damn." The cello music swelled, shifting into the deep, resonant opening notes of the processional. The heavy oak doors at the back of the hall swung wide open. Eleanor stepped into the light. She was wearing a structured, architectural silk gown with clean, sharp geometric lines that made her look like a sculpture carved out of white marble. Harrison was walking beside her, his chest puffed out so far his tuxedo jacket was straining at the button. When they reached the altar, Harrison didn't just do the standard handoff. He took Eleanor's hand, placed it firmly inside mine, reached up, and gripped the back of my neck, pulling me into a firm, rough masculine embrace that was captured by every camera in the room. The ceremony was completely flawless. When Reverend Vance pronounced us husband and wife, the applause from the right side of the room didn't just fill the hall. It roared, bouncing off the raw stone walls and completely drowning out any lingering shadow of the 3 empty chairs. By 8 p.m., the reception hall was a masterpiece of light and sound. Glasses were clinking. The jazz band was playing a brassy rendition of an old standard, and Harrison had just delivered a welcome toast that left half the room laughing and the other half wiping away tears. I was sitting at our sweetheart table, watching Eleanor laugh as Marcus demonstrated an absurd dance move near the bar. A venue coordinator in a black uniform approached the side of our table. She leaned down and set a crisp, standard white business envelope beside my water goblet. "Mr. Pendleton," she whispered. "This arrived via certified morning courier just before the ceremony started." The office staff held it until the formal speeches were concluded. I looked at the top left corner of the envelope. The return address was printed in sharp block letters. Richard and Beatrice Holdings, LLC. I picked up my dinner knife, slid the silver tip under the flap, and sliced it open. Inside was a corporate check for $500, signed by Beatrice. Wrapped around the check was a single slip of yellow legal paper containing one handwritten line. "We hope you learn the value of family someday." I didn't crumple the paper. I didn't pass it to Eleanor. I folded the note and the check together with extreme, geometric precision, reached inside my tailored tuxedo jacket, and slid them deep into my inner breast pocket right over my heart, feeling their physical weight against my ribs like a loaded magazine. At that exact, divine second, the smartwatch strapped to my left wrist gave a long, solid vibration. It was an encrypted priority notification from Mr. Henderson, my senior real estate attorney and private wealth manager. I tapped the glass screen. "Arthur, wire transfer cleared the Federal Reserve portal at 16:30 hours. County clerk recorded the master deed at 17:15. All escrow contingencies are fully satisfied. You are now the sole equity owner and holding entity of Apex Industrial Park." I stared at the glowing green letters on my wrist. Apex Industrial Park. It was the massive, 30-acre commercial yard where Richard's heavy equipment leasing business had leased its central maintenance and storage facilities for 22 years. Richard didn't own the dirt under his bulldozers. He leased it from an aging commercial syndicate that had quietly put the entire parcel up for private equity liquidation 8 months ago. I looked across the dance floor at Eleanor. She caught my eye, saw the strange, absolute stillness in my posture, and raised her champagne flute toward me with a slow, knowing smile. I reached up, let my fingers brush against the exterior of the breast pocket containing my mother's $500 check, and smiled a cold, silent smile in return. My mother thought she had left me with a hollow memory. She thought she had punished me with 3 empty chairs and a cheap piece of paper. She had no idea she had just handed the master key of her entire domestic reality over to her middle son. The storm was over. The ground was clear. And now the demolition crew was officially moving in. We spent the first 3 weeks of our marriage on a tiny, private atoll off the coast of Belize. There were no paved roads, no television screens, and most importantly, zero cellular reception. We kept our devices powered down in the bottom of our luggage, spending our days swimming in the warm, turquoise water and our evenings eating grilled red snapper by the light of kerosene lanterns. When we finally landed at Miami International Airport for our connecting flight back to New York, Eleanor turned her phone back on while we were waiting on the tarmac. The device didn't just chime. It vibrated so violently and continuously against the airplane's plastic armrest that the gentleman sitting across the aisle actually looked over in alarm. Over the course of 21 days, my biological family had engaged in a digital civil war of historic proportions. My cousin Lucas had forwarded me 42 separate screenshots from the extended family group chat. The day after our wedding, Beatrice had apparently realized that her sister Vivian had defied the family embargo. Beatrice had launched into an unhinged, multi-paragraph tirade, accusing Vivian of being a Judas, a homewrecker, and an emotionally unstable spinster who was trying to steal her son. Vivian hadn't responded with anger. She had simply replied with a single, high-resolution photograph of me and Eleanor standing at the altar, looking supremely happy, accompanied by the caption, "The food was magnificent, Beatrice. You really missed out on the prime rib." According to Lucas, Beatrice had thrown her iPad across her kitchen, shattering the screen against her porcelain sink. I read through the backlog of chaos as our plane taxied toward the gate. I felt entirely detached from it. It felt like reading the synopsis of a cheap daytime soap opera about people I used to know in high school. I archived the message thread, locked my screen, and took my wife's hand. We went home, we unpacked our bags, and we went back to work. 6 months passed in absolute productive silence. The Hudson Valley trees shed their leaves. The heavy New York winter came and went, and the first damp, green buds of spring began appearing along the city sidewalks. My commercial real estate portfolio was performing at an all-time high, and Eleanor's architectural preservation nonprofit had just secured a major federal grant. We were living in complete serenity. Then, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in late April, the bait arrived. I was sitting in my glass-walled conference room, going over the structural load assessments for a 12-story parking garage conversion, when my personal cell phone lit up with a text from Beatrice. It was the first direct communication I had received from her since the $500 check arrived at my wedding reception. "Arthur, please, I am begging you as your mother to pick up the phone. It is about your brother Conrad. He is in a very severe, very dark place. We don't know what to do anymore. Please come to the Newport Country Club this Thursday at 4 in the afternoon. Your father and I have secured the private garden room. We need the family whole to save him." I stared at the screen. A very severe, very dark place. In the standard suburban mother's playbook, the mental health crisis is the ultimate, non-negotiable trump card. It is designed to instantly paralyze the target's sense of self-preservation. If you refuse to respond to a wedding invitation, you're stubborn. If you refuse to respond to a brother's potential psychological collapse, you're a monster. Beatrice knew exactly what buttons to push to make the guilt receptors in my brain start firing. There was just one massive flaw in her intelligence gathering. Beatrice assumed that because Conrad and I hadn't spoken at the wedding, we were still completely estranged. She didn't know that 3 months prior, Conrad had quietly reached out to my professional email address to ask for a referral to a top-tier corporate tax attorney. We had spoken on the phone twice since then, brief, dry, entirely professional conversations between two adult men who were slowly learning how to view each other without our mother's narrative filter. I picked up my desk phone and dialed Conrad's direct office extension at his venture capital firm. He answered on the second ring. "Conrad Pendleton." "Conrad, it's Arthur. Quick question. Are you currently experiencing a severe, life-threatening psychological break?" A long pause ensued over the line. I could hear the rhythmic clicking of Conrad's mechanical keyboard. "I am currently eating a sweet onion chicken teriyaki sandwich from Subway while reviewing a Series B funding round for a logistics tech startup." "Why do you ask?" "Mom just texted me," I said, leaning back in my chair. "She told me you were in a dark place and that I needed to report to the Newport Country Club on Thursday afternoon for an emergency family intervention to save your life." Conrad let out a short, incredibly dry sound that was half laugh, half groan. "Oh, Jesus Christ. She's using the failing health maneuver. For the record, Artie, I haven't spoken to Beatrice in 3 weeks. She called me last Sunday demanding that I contribute $10,000 to help cover the cost of Sterling's rehearsal dinner at the Ritz-Carlton. I told her my capital was tied up in index funds and hung up. She's trying to drag you into a room to gang up on your wallet. That's what I figured, I said. Enjoy your teriyaki, Artie, Conrad said before I could disconnect. Don't go. If you step into that room, she's just going to bleed you. I have to go, Con, I said softly, looking out at the gray New York rain. The foundation is already excavated. It's time to pour the concrete. On Thursday afternoon at 3:15 p.m., I stepped out of my office building and walked down into the subterranean executive garage. I didn't take the standard company sedan. I unlocked the pristine, GT Silver Porsche 911 Carrera S that my holding entity had purchased as a corporate tax write-off the previous fiscal quarter. I slid into the low leather seat, started the twin-turbo engine, and let the deep, mechanical bark echo off the concrete walls before pulling up onto the damp asphalt of the West Side Highway. The drive up to Newport took 45 minutes. I didn't listen to music. I didn't practice a speech. I just listened to the steady hum of the tires against the road. The Newport Country Club looked exactly as it had when I was a teenager. A massive, sprawling neoclassical monstrosity with dark green striped awnings, perfectly manicured bentgrass lawns, and an overwhelming atmosphere of generational pretension. I pulled the Porsche 911 directly up to the main valet circle, stepped out, and handed the key fob to a young man in a white polo shirt who couldn't take his eyes off the car's aggressive rear fenders. I walked through the double glass doors, past the trophy cases smelling of brass polish and old mahogany, and approached the maitre d' desk. The Pendleton party, I said. The private garden room. The maitre d' gave a crisp nod and led me down a long, carpeted hallway lined with historic golfing portraits. He reached a heavy oak door at the very end of the corridor, turned the brass handle, and stepped aside. I walked into the room. It was a circular private dining area with floor-to-ceiling glass panels overlooking the 18th hole. In the center of the room sat a round mahogany table covered in a heavy white linen cloth, set with fine porcelain teacups, silver spoons, and a massive centerpiece of pink calla lilies. Sitting around the table were 3 people: Beatrice, Richard, and Sterling. There was no Conrad. There was no medical personnel. There was no crisis. The moment the heavy oak door clicked shut behind me, the immediate visual reality of the trap was exposed. Beatrice was wearing a somber, high-necked navy cashmere dress, her hair sprayed into an unmoving helmet. Richard was wearing a slightly rumpled gray suit, staring down at his cuticles with the posture of a beaten dog. Sterling was sitting back in his chair with his ankle resting on his knee, wearing a tailored linen sports coat and a smirking, supremely confident expression. "Arthur," Beatrice gasped, instantly pressing her hand over her sternum and rising half an inch out of her chair before sinking back down. "Oh, thank God you came. Look at you. You look so thin, honey. Sit down. Please, sit right here next to your brother." I didn't take off my tailored charcoal overcoat. I didn't pull out the chair next to Sterling. I remained standing exactly 3 feet inside the threshold, my hands resting loosely inside my coat pockets. "Where is Conrad?" I asked, my voice entirely level. Beatrice waved her hand dismissively toward the window, her tragic expression instantly replacing itself with smooth administrative efficiency. "Oh, Conrad's therapist felt that the emotional intensity of a full family reconciliation might be too stimulating for his nervous system today. We felt it was much safer to start with just the core unit." "Sit down, Arthur." I ordered the Earl Grey. "You lied about Conrad having a mental breakdown to get me into a tea room," I said. "It wasn't a question." "Don't use that harsh word, Arthur." Beatrice sighed, her eyes darting toward the closed door to ensure no service staff could hear her. "It wasn't a lie. It was an emotional interpretation. You have been completely unreachable for 6 months. You blocked your own mother on Facebook. You returned your brother's RSVP cards like they were junk mail. We had to use an urgent framing to break through your wall of stubbornness." Before I could answer, Sterling leaned forward, setting his elbows down on the pristine white linen. He didn't look remorseful. He looked like a fraternity president conducting a disciplinary hearing. "Bro, seriously, enough with the dramatic tough guy act," Sterling said, rolling his eyes. "You made Mom cry for 3 weeks straight after your little Hudson Valley stunt. She actually had to double her dosage of lisinopril because her blood pressure was spiking. You proved your point, okay? You showed everyone you're independent. Now it's time to grow up and fix the family." I looked at Sterling's face. "Fix the family how, Sterling?" Beatrice reached into her pristine leather handbag and pulled out a clean, multi-page legal document printed on heavy bond paper. She laid it flat on the table and slid it across the mahogany surface until the bottom edge hung over the side right in front of where I was standing. The top of the document was printed in bold, capitalized letters: Family Reconciliation, Cost Sharing, and Non-Disparagement Agreement. "What is this?" I asked, looking down at the black ink. "It is a fresh start," Beatrice said, her voice dropping into that rhythmic, hypnotic register she used when she was trying to convince the HOA board to approve a special assessment fee. "We had an attorney draft it, Arthur. It simply states that we all agree to put the unfortunate misunderstandings of last October behind us, that neither party will make negative statements about the family structure in public or on social media, and that you agree to assume your rightful place as a co-sponsor for Sterling's upcoming wedding." I let out a slow, quiet breath. "A co-sponsor?" "Yes, bro," Sterling chimed in, his smirk widening into a full, arrogant grin. "Look, Tiffany's dad is covering the reception at the Breakers in Palm Beach, but the groom's side is responsible for the welcome dinner, the luxury transportation shuttles, and the private yacht charter for the bridal party. It's running about 60 grand. Conrad's being a total cheapskate, and Dad's business has had some cash flow hiccups this quarter. Since you and Eleanor saved all that money by doing that low-budget mill wedding, Mom and Dad figured you could pick up the tab for the welcome events. It's your brotherly duty, Artie. Plus, it'll be a great networking opportunity for your little architecture firm to get in front of Tiffany's dad's developer friends." I looked from Sterling's smug face to Beatrice's expectant eyes, and finally down to Richard, who was actively refusing to make eye contact with me. His shoulders hunched so high they were touching his earlobes. They didn't want to apologize. They didn't want to heal a broken bond. They had lured me into a private room at a luxury country club to hand me an invoice for my own emotional abuse. "Kai veo don koi kung di contre," Beatrice said softly, tapping her manicured fingernail against the signature line. "Let's put the past behind us and be a family again." I didn't pick up the silver pen sitting beside the paper. I didn't raise my voice. I simply reached into my pocket, pulled out my cell phone, and gave a sharp, double tap against the glass screen. The sharp double tap of my fingernail against my phone screen wasn't an emotional tick. It was a prearranged audio cue. Sitting at a small, two-person table in the far corner of the adjacent public lounge, separated from our private room only by a heavy velvet curtain, was Mr. Henderson. He was 62 years old, a former federal corporate litigator who now managed the master trust of my commercial holdings. He was wearing a bespoke, three-piece navy pinstripe suit, his silver hair parted with razor-sharp precision. The moment he heard the double tap over our open cellular line, the velvet curtain pushed aside. Henderson walked into the private garden room carrying a massive, incredibly worn corduroy legal briefcase. He didn't look at Beatrice. He didn't acknowledge Sterling. He walked directly up to the mahogany table, unlatched the brass locks of the briefcase, and pulled out a 2-inch thick stack of legal documentation bound in heavy blue backing paper. He set the massive stack down directly on top of Beatrice's pristine family reconciliation agreement, the physical weight of the heavy legal paper creating a loud, solid thud that rattled the fine porcelain teacups. "Excuse me," Beatrice gasped, instantly bristling, her administrative mask slipping completely. "Who are you? This is a private family conference. Maitre d', maitre d'. There is an unauthorized person in the garden room." "Sit down, Beatrice," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried a cold, institutional density that hit her like a physical hand against her chest. She stopped mid-shout, her mouth hanging open, her eyes darting from my face to Henderson's incredibly calm, predatory stance. "Mom," I said, stepping up to the edge of the mahogany table and resting my fingertips lightly against the heavy blue backing paper. "Before I look at your little arts and crafts project, I want to introduce you to someone. This is Arthur Henderson. He is the Senior Managing Director of Sanctuary Holdings, LLC. He is also my Chief General Counsel." Sterling scoffed, though his posture stiffened slightly. "Bro, what is this? You brought a lawyer to a family sit-down? That's super weird, man." "It's not a family sit-down, Sterling," I said, keeping my eyes locked on my father, Richard. "It's a formal notification of lease expiration." Richard finally looked up from his cuticles. His eyes went wide, the skin around his mouth suddenly turning the color of skim milk. "Artie, what are you talking about? Lease expiration for what?" I opened the top cover of the heavy blue legal stack. I flipped past the title pages, the municipal tax stamps, and the federal incorporation records, stopping on a high-resolution, full-color plat map of the Newport Industrial Corridor. "Parcel for B," I said, pointing my finger directly at a large, red-outlined square near the shipping docks. 32 acres of heavy commercial zoning. It contains 2 maintenance hangars, a 4-story administrative brick building, and a 300-vehicle secure concrete storage yard. It is the central operating headquarters of Richard and Sons Heavy Excavation. Richard's hands began to shake. He reached out and gripped the edge of the table so hard his knuckles turned yellow. How do you have that map?" "You've been writing a monthly commercial rent check of $12,400 to the Apex Commercial Syndicate since October of 2004, Dad," I said, my voice dropping into a clean, rhythmic cadence. "It was a fantastic deal. A standard triple-net commercial lease with a 10-year locked renewal cap. But what you didn't know, because you don't read the Municipal Commercial Registry, is that the senior partners of the Apex Syndicate passed away 18 months ago. Their heirs had zero interest in managing industrial dirt. They quietly put the entire syndicate's paper up for private equity liquidation last August." Beatrice looked completely bewildered, her brain struggling to translate commercial real estate terminology into suburban social currency. Richard, what is he talking about? Why is he talking about the truck yard?" "Shut up, Beatrice," Richard hissed, his voice cracking with a raw, mortal panic I had never heard from him before. He looked at me, his eyes wide and terrified. "Artie, who bought the paper?" I leaned forward, placing my palms flat on the table, bringing my face exactly 2 feet from my father's shaking head. "I bought the paper, Dad," I said softly. "Sanctuary Holdings LLC acquired 100% of the voting stock and physical assets of the Apex Syndicate 3 days before my wedding. I am the holding entity. I own the dirt under your excavators. I own the asphalt you park your service trucks on. I own the concrete walls of your office. And according to Section 8, Subsection C of your commercial master lease, your 10-year renewal window closes at midnight on November 30th. The silence in the private garden room became absolute. The only sound was the distant, muffled thwack of a golf club hitting a ball somewhere out on the fairway. Richard looked like someone had just hit him in the sternum with a bag of wet sand. He slumped back into his chair, his jaw trembling. You're the landlord." "Yes," I said. "Bro, wait, hold on," Sterling stammered, his smirking confidence completely collapsing into high-pitched confusion. He looked at Beatrice, then at Richard. "Dad, what does that mean? If Artie owns the yard, he just signs the renewal paper, right? He's your son. He doesn't have to sign it, Sterling." Henderson spoke up, his voice smooth, cultured, and entirely devoid of mercy. He opened a secondary folder inside the blue stack and slid a clean, single-page document across the cloth directly toward Richard. "According to the municipal commercial rent stabilization codes of this county, because Richard and Sons is an industrial enterprise operating under a legacy commercial syndicate agreement, The holding entity is legally permitted to adjust the baseline rental rate to current market value upon contract expiration. Current market value for Parcel 4B, based on recent maritime storage developments, is $34,700 per month. Richard let out a strangled, wheezing gasp. 34,000. Artie, no. No, son, please. That's a 180% increase. That'll wipe out my entire operating margin. I'll be underwater by February. I'll have to liquidate the fleet. That is not my concern, Richard, I said, addressing him by his first name for the first time in my life. You are a tenant whose legacy subsidy has expired. You have 45 days to sign the new lease agreement and remit the updated security deposit of $104,000. Or Mr. Henderson's office will initiate formal commercial eviction proceedings on December 1st. Your heavy equipment will be impounded by the county sheriff to cover unpaid utility liens. Beatrice finally snapped out of her administrative paralysis. Her face turned a violent, mottled crimson. She slammed her hands down on the table, knocking over her porcelain teacup, sending a dark stream of Earl Grey soaking into the white linen. "Arthur Pendleton!" she shrieked, her voice reaching a pitch that vibrated the window panes. "You are a monster. You are a cold-blooded, psychopathic monster. You would evict your own father? You would destroy your own family's livelihood over a petty little grudge about a wedding date? I carried you inside my body for 9 months. I wiped your tears. I fed you. You owe us your life." I didn't flinch. I reached inside my inner tailored breast pocket. I didn't pull out a handkerchief. I pulled out the crisp white business envelope containing her uncashed $500 wedding check and the handwritten note about learning the value of family. I dropped the check directly into the center of the spreading puddle of spilled tea. "You carried me for 9 months, Beatrice," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that cut through her screaming like a scalpel. "And then you spent 32 years treating me like an unpaid utility closet. You didn't feed me, you maintained a baseline resource. You skipped the most important day of my life so Sterling wouldn't miss a free trip to Palm Beach with a girl he's known for 5 months. And then you tried to blackmail my wife's family with fake black mold rumors." Beatrice gasped, her hand flying to her throat as she realized the Brenda voicemail had been fully exposed. "Here is your $500, I said, pointing at the soggy check. "Use it to pay for your own iced tea today. And if I ever see another passive-aggressive paragraph on Facebook mentioning my wife, or if I ever receive another manipulative text message about Conrad's mental health, Mr. Henderson will not only execute the commercial eviction, he will file a formal civil petition for the immediate repayment of the $80,000 you embezzled from my grandfather's college trust fund when I was 18. Richard's head snapped toward Beatrice with incredible violence. "What, Beatrice? What trust fund? You told me Arthur's trust fund was wiped out in the dot-com crash." Beatrice shrank back into her chair, her face turning gray, her lips trembling silently as she realized her ultimate financial crime had been fully reconstructed by Henderson's forensic accountants. "We are done," I said, turning my back on the table. "Mr. Henderson, leave the lease documents with the tenant. Let's go." I didn't wait to watch them squabble. I didn't wait for Sterling to start crying. I walked out of the private garden room, down the long hallway of golf portraits, and stepped out into the clean, cool Newport rain. I slid into the Porsche 911, started the engine, and pulled out onto the main road, feeling the immense, crushing weight of my past completely detach and dissolve into the rearview mirror. Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far. You're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey. The institutional shockwave of the country club sit-down completely demolished the family's social infrastructure within 48 hours. By Friday evening, my phone was receiving a steady stream of automated notifications from the family network. Beatrice hadn't gone on Facebook to write a tragic update. She had completely deactivated her account. According to my cousin Lucas, who called me while driving home from a lumber yard, the domestic interior of my parents' house had turned into an active war zone. "Artie, it's absolute insanity over there," Lucas said, his voice crackling with pure, unadulterated amusement. My dad went over to their place to drop off a pipe wrench, and he said Richard was literally screaming at Beatrice in the driveway. Richard found the old bank statements in her sewing desk. "She didn't just take your 80 grand, Artie. She took 40 grand out of Conrad's trust fund too, and funneled the whole pile into a shell LLC to pay for Sterling's fraternity housing, his luxury car down payments, and his credit card debt. Richard's heavy equipment business is officially underwater, and he's blaming her for losing the real estate subsidy." "What's Sterling doing?" I asked, looking over a series of architectural blueprints with Eleanor. "Oh, the golden child is completely panicking," Lucas laughed. "Tiffany's father found out about the commercial eviction notice through his developer buddies in Newport. He realized Sterling's family isn't regional old money. They're broke industrial tenants who embezzle from their own kids. Tiffany's dad officially pulled the funding for the Palm Beach wedding at the Breakers. He told Sterling that if he wants to marry Tiffany, they have to do a standard local church wedding, and Sterling has to sign an ironclad prenuptial agreement waiving all claims to the dealership equity. I didn't feel a warm rush of vindication. I didn't feel the urge to call Sterling and gloat. I felt the profound, sterile satisfaction of watching a math equation balance itself out. 2 weeks later, at 11:15 p.m., the physical manifestation of their collapse arrived at my front door. It was raining violently, heavy spring sheets slapping against the brick exterior of our townhouse. The security intercom in the kitchen gave a sharp, persistent buzz. I pressed the video monitor. Standing on our concrete stoop, completely soaked, without an umbrella or an overcoat, was my father, Richard. He looked 10 years older than he had at the country club. His gray suit was plastered to his skin, his hair plastered across his forehead, water dripping from his chin onto his soggy collar. Eleanor walked into the kitchen, wrapped in a thick wool cardigan, holding a warm mug of chamomile tea. She looked at the small video screen, then looked at me. "Do you want me to call the precinct?" "No," I said quietly. "I'll handle it." I opened the heavy oak front door, leaving the internal wrought iron security gate locked. I stood in the warm, dry entryway, looking out through the black iron bars at my father standing in the rain. "Artie," Richard croaked, his voice barely audible over the roaring downpour. He gripped the iron bars with both hands, his knuckles white. "Artie, please, son. You have to let me in. We have to talk about the commercial lease. I went to the commercial bank today, Artie. They won't extend my operating line of credit. If you execute that $34,000 rental rate on December 1st, I'm finished. I'll have to declare Chapter 11 bankruptcy. I'll lose the trucks. I'll lose the maintenance contracts I spent 30 years building. You can't do this to me, son. I'm your father." I stood 2 feet behind the iron gate, my hands resting inside my pockets. I looked at his desperate, rain-lashed face. "You aren't my father, Richard," I said, my voice completely clear and steady. "You are a bystander. You stood by while Beatrice stole my college fund. You stood by while she tried to sabotage my wedding. You stood by while Sterling treated my home like a hotel. You never protected my perimeter. You just managed the utility closet so the light bulb would turn on when you needed a tool." "I was weak, Artie," Richard sobbed, tears mixing with the rainwater on his cheeks. "I know I was weak. Your mother, her temper. I just wanted to keep the peace in the house. I didn't want the boys fighting." "You didn't keep the peace, Richard," I said. "You subsidized a thief because you were too cowardly to have an uncomfortable conversation. And now the bill has arrived." "Artie, please," he begged, shaking the iron gate. "What do you want me to do? Tell me what the price is. I'll do anything." "You want the legacy rental rate locked in for 5 years?" I asked. Richard nodded frantically, his eyes wide with desperate hope. Yes, Artie, please." "Then here is the price," I said. stepping up directly to the iron bars. Tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, you will log onto your personal Facebook account. You will write a public, non-restricted post. You will state clearly that you and Beatrice fabricated the entire narrative about Eleanor controlling me. You will state clearly that Beatrice embezzled $80,000 from my trust fund. You will explicitly apologize to my wife by name, and you will tag Beatrice, Sterling, and every single member of the extended family in the post. You do that, and Mr. Henderson will lock your lease in at $12,000 until 2031. Do you accept? Richard completely froze. His hands stayed gripped around the wet iron bars, but his mouth hung open in silent, paralyzed terror. He couldn't do it. To write that post would mean complete, absolute social suicide in his suburban ecosystem. It would mean Beatrice's country club friends would see her as a common criminal. It would mean his brothers would know he was a cuckolded financial failure. His core philosophy, "I don't want any drama," was so deeply ingrained in his nervous system that he would literally rather lose his 30-year business than endure a public, uncomfortable truth. He let go of the iron bars. He took a slow, trembling step backward into the pouring rain, his head dropping down to his chest. "That's what I thought," I said. I closed the heavy oak door, threw the deadbolt, and turned off the porch light, leaving him standing alone in the dark. 18 months later, the final domino fell. Sterling's scaled-down church wedding to Tiffany was a complete social disaster. According to Lucas, Tiffany's family sat on the right side of the aisle looking like an execution squad, while the groom's side consisted of Richard, Beatrice, and 3 fraternity brothers who showed up hungover. Less than a year after the ceremony, Sterling's luxury lifestyle completely outpaced his junior sales salary. He defaulted on the mortgage of his Connecticut townhouse. Tiffany didn't stick around to help him rebuild. She filed for divorce, executed her prenuptial agreement, and moved back into her father's Palm Beach estate. Beatrice attempted one final, desperate public pivot. She reactivated her Facebook account and posted a blurry, black-and-white photograph of Sterling looking sad, accompanied by the caption, "Some young men have hearts too pure for this cruel world. My sweet boy was completely deceived and abandoned by a toxic, narcissistic woman who took advantage of his unconditional grace. Family is the only true sanctuary left." My cousin Lucas didn't write a long reply. He simply took a screenshot of her post, attached the public municipal bankruptcy filing of Richard and Son's heavy excavation, and commented, "Aunt Beatrice, your commercial landlord called. Your storage unit is locked due to non-payment." The family had completely lost its grip on reality. And as for me and Eleanor, we were already standing on higher ground. 3 years after the country club sit-down, the New York spring arrived with an explosion of brilliant, golden sunlight. I was sitting at a quiet, outdoor corner table at a small French bistro in Soho, watching the morning foot traffic move along the cobblestone street. Sitting across from me was my older brother, Conrad. He looked entirely different from the stressed-out corporate drone I had known in my 20s. He was wearing a simple, unbuttoned Oxford shirt, his skin slightly tanned from a recent hiking trip in Patagonia. Conrad reached into his leather satchel and pulled out a small, incredibly heavy brass key. He set it down on the marble table directly next to my espresso cup. "What's this?" I asked, picking up the cool metal. "It's the safety deposit box key from grandfather's original estate firm," Conrad said, leaning back and crossing his arms. "I spent the last 6 months untangling the legacy trust paper with Henderson's team. When Beatrice set up that fraudulent shell company to drain our college funds, she missed a secondary municipal holding account grandfather opened in 1994. It was specifically designated as an architectural seed fund for you, Artie. It's been sitting in low-yield municipal bonds for 30 years. After capital gains taxes, it's sitting at roughly $140,000. I stared down at the small brass key. I felt a profound, incredible sensation of complete spiritual closure. For 32 years, I had operated under the lingering internal assumption that my family's neglect was a reflection of my own personal deficit. I thought I was unlovable. I thought I was too quiet, too boring, or too independent to earn the warmth that Beatrice lavished on Sterling. This little brass key proved the absolute ultimate truth. I was never unlovable. I was just an inconvenient audit. My mother didn't ignore me because I was flawed. She ignored me because my independence was a constant, living threat to her financial embezzlement. My success was a daily, visual reminder of the money she had stolen. "Thanks, Con," I said, sliding the key into my pocket. "Don't thank me, Artie," Conrad said softly, looking down at his coffee. "I should have looked at the ledger 10 years ago. I let Mom use me as an administrative hammer to keep you in line. I'm sorry. The ledger is balanced, Con," I said, offering him a firm, genuine smile. "Drink your espresso. We have to be uptown by noon." At 12:30 p.m., we pulled up to the iron gates of Harrison and Genevieve's estate in the Hudson Valley. The sprawling 2-acre back lawn was an absolute masterpiece of life and color. Thousands of yellow and white daffodils were blooming along the stone retaining walls, and a massive, white sailcloth tent was set up near the restored greenhouse. Inside the tent, a string quartet was playing a light, joyful Vivaldi arrangement, and long wooden farm tables were covered in white linen, fine glass pitchers of iced lemon water, and massive platters of fresh spring pastries. It was the formal baby shower for our firstborn son. I walked under the canvas archway, feeling an overwhelming, incredible sense of pride. The guest list was a masterclass in strict boundary preservation. Sitting at the main family table were Harrison, Genevieve, DeVivian, Conrad, Lucas, and Marcus's family. There were no distant suburban cousins whispering in the corners. There were no passive-aggressive aunts evaluating the floral arrangements. There were 0 ghosts from my biological past. Every single person sitting under that canvas roof was an active, supportive, emotionally clean contributor to our lives. Eleanor was sitting in a high-backed wicker peacock chair, looking incredibly radiant in a flowing sage-green linen dress, resting her hand over her 7-month pregnancy bump while laughing at a story Vivian was telling about a disastrous interior design client in Boston. I walked over, stood behind her chair, and let my hands rest gently on her shoulders. Harrison stood up from the end of the table, raised a fine crystal glass of sparkling cider, and looked directly at me. "To the architect," Harrison said, his deep voice carrying over the quiet chatter of the garden. "A man who had the courage to tear down a rotten frame so he could build a true sanctuary for his son. May this boy grow up never knowing the weight of an empty chair." The entire tent erupted in warm, heartfelt applause. I looked down at Eleanor. She reached up, covered my hand with hers, and leaned her head back against my chest. At that exact second, my private cell phone sitting inside my pocket gave a short, silent pulse. I didn't pull it out. Later that evening, when we were back in our quiet townhouse, I checked the administrative log. A high-priority email had attempted to breach my professional server from an unverified address registered to Beatrice Pendleton. The subject line read, "Arthur, please, I have a legal right to see my biological grandson." The automated corporate firewall Henderson had installed didn't even route the message to my inbox. It didn't trigger a desktop notification. It didn't make a sound. The system identified the sender's syntax, categorized it as external domestic spam, and permanently wiped the file from the master server, leaving behind only clean, empty, uncorrupted digital space. I stood out on our 3rd-story wrought iron balcony, watching the warm New York twilight settle over the city rooftops. I could hear Eleanor inside the nursery, softly humming as she folded tiny, soft cotton onesies and placed them into the cedar drawers I had built with my own hands. I looked down at the street below, watching the golden streetlights flicker on one by one. I finally understood what a true narrative architect does. You don't spend your life trying to edit a bad script written by people who want you to fail. You don't spend your life begging for scraps of validation from an empty table. You take your capital, you establish your perimeter, and you lay your own brick. Thank you so much for staying with me through this entire journey. If there is one absolute, non-negotiable lesson I want you to take away from my story tonight, especially for the incredible women watching this who have spent decades sacrificing your own peace to maintain the illusion of a happy family table. Blood is a biological description. It is not a binding moral mortgage. You do not owe your sanity, your savings, or your self-worth to people who view your life as an administrative convenience. Setting a boundary isn't an act of cruelty. It is the highest form of self-respect. If someone is determined to treat you like an afterthought to a Cabo trip, let them pack their bags. But make sure you change the locks before they get back. Have you ever faced a similar situation where you had to completely reconstruct your family boundaries to protect your own mental peace? How did you find the courage to walk away? Share your story in the comments below. Your testimony might be the exact blueprint someone else needs to finally start building their own sanctuary. And please, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss our next journey together. Stay strong, protect your peace, and I'll see you in the next video.